Hello and welcome to Dragon Puppet. My name is Thomas and today I'm going to talk about my feelings and thoughts on the upcoming Warhammer 40,000 live action cinematic universe that Henry Cavill recently announced. I'm going to try and split my thoughts into four kind of rough parts. Firstly, what we definitely know about the project from the little we've been told, what we can expect from it based on other similar projects, some of the challenges they might face, and fourthly, my personal feelings and kind of like what I would like to see or what I think would do well. This is an unscripted video, I'm just kind of talking freeform, but I wanted to get my thoughts out there because lots of people in the community have been sharing their thoughts and I just wanted to kind of throw my hat into the ring. Also, I want to get back into the habit of creating content for this channel this year, so this seemed like a good place to start. So firstly, what do we know about this project? Well, from Henry Cavill's Instagram post that he made and the accompanying press release from Games Workshop, we know that this project is going to be distributed and produced by Amazon with Vertigo Entertainment, and we know that Henry Cavill is attached somehow, maybe starring in it, definitely producing in some way, but he's definitely also acting as like an ambassador to the fan base. Everybody knows that Henry Cavill is a big Warhammer fan, so having him kind of in this project working with the producers and the writers as a sort of like fan ambassador, he's going to make sure that the film or the show stays as true to the 40k setting that the fans are familiar with and that fans love. He says that in his post, that he's going to bring us something familiar, but he also says that he's going to bring us something that is as of yet unseen. And I think what that means is that he's going to be, or the writers are going to be exploring new stories and new characters. So I don't think we should expect this to be like a Horus Heresy show or an Eisenhorn show or anything. I think they're going to probably go for new characters and new stories that we don't know like where they're going or how they're going to end. I think that's probably a good idea. So moving on to what we can expect. The way I kind of think about this is just kind of comparing it to other similar projects. So the most obvious one is the Rings of Power show that Amazon made that came out last year now, that cost nearly $500 million to produce. I think this is the best example because Lord of the Rings is a kind of comparable IP to Warhammer in that it's a well-established fantasy setting that's been around for a while, that has a huge fan base and has a lot of potential for storytelling. And Amazon picked up what they could for Rings of Power, which wasn't a lot. They weren't given a lot to work with. There was a few reasons that the show wasn't as successful as they hoped, I think, but one of them was definitely that they weren't given as much of the setting to play with as they wanted. They were given a very specific time period, that there wasn't a lot of story to tell there. Now, I don't think that's going to be a problem they run into with the Warhammer project, because it seems from the press release that Games Workshop have granted Amazon or Vertigo complete access to the entire 40k setting at any time period, in any place, with any characters and any factions. So from the press release, it seems they've got a lot of freedom to tell whichever stories they want, which I think is a really good thing. For really good shows and films and art to be created, the writers and the producers need freedom, and it seems like they've got it from Games Workshop this time, which is kind of surprising because they're usually very protective of their IP, but they seem to be being quite liberal with it at the moment, which I think is a good thing. We can also learn from the Rings of Power show that this is probably going to be something that Amazon are willing to throw a lot of money at. Other shows that Amazon have produced, they've also thrown a lot of money at. They have a lot of money to spare, and they are willing to sink it into these big sort of like flagship shows to draw people into their services, and also to draw people into Amazon Prime, the actual website, not just streaming. So this is a good thing. I don't think they're probably going to put as much money into it as they did with Rings of Power, which, as I said, cost nearly $500 million to produce, because it didn't make as much money as they hoped. But maybe still they're going to put a lot of money into it, because that seems to be what they do historically with other shows as well. We can also compare it to the Dungeons and Dragons film that was announced a while back and is set to be released in March of this year. This was actually announced in 2013, so it's actually been 10 years since they announced it to when it's been released. So this comparison could give us an idea of how long these productions tend to take. I don't think it will take 10 years from when Henry announced it at Christmas to them producing it. I don't think we're going to have to wait until 2033, but also we shouldn't be expecting this to happen very soon. this is really early days. They've not got any writers, they've not got any actors, they've not really got anybody attached to this project except for Henry Cavill. So we are in early days, and it's still going to be a few years off before we start to see anything from this. As far as I know, the Dungeons and Dragons film is set in the Forgotten Realm, so like an established setting, but it is using new characters. So maybe we can expect something like that from the Warhammer Cinematic Universe, where it's the world and the setting that we're familiar with, but they're bringing in new characters and new stories that we've not heard before. Also, when we talk about cinematic universes, obviously we have to compare it to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is the prime example and maybe arguably like the first real cinematic universe. And I think the main thing we can learn from this is that if it takes off, it could be huge. And the MCU is absolutely massive. There's so much content out there now. And also there's like a diverse range of content. The MCU covers stories told through TV shows, through shorts, through cinematic releases. And they cover a whole bunch of characters in different places and time periods, not just all at the same kind of area. They jump around to really give us a diverse, interesting look at the entire setting. And I think if Warhammer want to do the same thing, that would be really good. We need to tell lots of stories. Warhammer 40,000 is such a wide and diverse setting. There is so many different stories to tell from different time periods, different places in the galaxy, and from the points of view of different characters and different factions. So hopefully they do that too. We can also compare to Warhammer Plus, which is the Games Workshop's streaming platform where they do a bunch of different things, including shorts and like mini kind of webisodes set in their various in the fantasy and 40k setting. I think Hammer and Bolter is a really good example of this, and I think that would be a good way for them to go. Hammer and Bolter, if you don't know, is a series on Warhammer Plus where each episode is a completely new and original story that doesn't really link in with the other ones. They're all connected simply by the fact that they take place in the 40k setting, and they're all from different points of view, all this kind of stuff. And I think that would be a really good way if we can kind of take the Hammer and Bolter kind of attitude and apply an Amazon budget to it and spread it across several different shows and films. I think we'd be in for a really good time. Something else that Games Workshop have produced in the past that some people kind of forget about is there was a Space Marine film, sort of straight to DVD film back in the day, with some pretty big actors attached to it. But it didn't do very well. I think it was partly because the visual effects weren't great, but that's not always a killer. Like visual effects that aren't perfect can still work if the story is strong enough. And I think that was the main problem with this one, is that the story and the characters just weren't compelling, and it didn't kind of catch people. Lots of people have issues with how they represented Space Marines, how they presented Chaos Space Marines, and kind of weakened them a little bit, or just didn't get them quite right. So I think I don't think we should be comparing that to what we can expect from this, because I think a lot of lessons were learned from that project, and I think Henry Cavill and the other writers involved in this future project are going to be very aware of what went wrong with the Space Marine film and how to not do it again. And the last thing I want to compare it to, a bit of a curveball maybe, but Dune, the film that came out recently. Some of you may know that the Warhammer 40,000 universe is heavily influenced by the Dune books. So finding how successful the Dune film was recently in portraying what is another kind of grim, dark science fiction setting, I think would be really useful. Dune is a very gritty and kind of depressing setting with lots of very complicated and kind of weird lore, and yet the film was able to portray it in a very kind of believable, grounded way. So a lot of people worried that 40k can't translate to live action because it's too weird and too kind of just exaggerated and strange. But then you can look at something like Dune and you can say if it's done properly and it's taken seriously, it actually can work in live action. So that's worth noting. Anyway, moving on to some of the challenges. This is kind of quite a good segue actually, because one of the main challenges I think that they're going to face in this project is the translating it to live action. There haven't really been any notable live action Warhammer short films or series. There's been lots of little stuff that's been released over the years, like cinematics in games or short films by fans or all kinds of stuff. But live action is very difficult for 40k. In fact, there's been a couple of examples. There was a short film made, I forget, I'll put it on the screen, but it's with a Guardsman and some Tyranids, and then right at the end there's there was also I'm thinking of the cutscenes from the Final Liberation video game way back in the day, which were very low res, um, but technically live action, which is kind of cool. And the problem is that the madness of 40k, once you put it into live action, sometimes just looks a little bit off. Now, obviously, these things can be resolved with a creative team and enough budget behind them. And if you look at I think the best example is Space Marines, because if you see like a Space Marine cosplayer, they look amazing. Like, they do look amazing in person, in photos and all this stuff. It's an incredible achievement. But nobody in a Space Marine cosplay can run like a Space Marine, obviously, because the person inside is not a superhuman, genetically modified Astartes. So that would all have to be CG. Now, we know that Space Marines can look cool running. It's not like the suit of armor in itself is the problem, because if you look at things like the Astartes film and we see Space Marines running, they look really cool and they run in a very believable way. But it does mean that Space Marines will have to be completely CG. And I think there's a lot of things in the Warhammer 40k universe that if you did them live action, it would have to be completely CG. Again, this is not necessarily a bad thing. It just has to be done properly and done with care, because there's a good few examples of films that really lent into CG, and it kind of changed the film or made the film not feel real. But then if they're done properly and they're done with care and with time, having a film that is basically all CG can still feel like a live action film if it is done properly. So the live action translation will be a big challenge. I think another challenge will be keeping the message or the tone of 40k, which is difficult primarily because the tone of 40k is kind of hard to pin down. People, even long-term fans of 40k, might argue about what the message or the tone or the vibe of 40k is. Some think it's a very serious, very gritty thing. Some people think it's kind of like a parody. It's kind of stupid. It's a bit silly. It pokes fun at itself. Some people think it's just rule of cool and just like massive action explosions and stuff. And you could also quite easily argue that Warhammer 40k has a strong anti-war or anti-religion or anti-fascist message as well. So there's lots of stuff in there that different people take away from 40k. So I think creating a tone or a message or a theme for this cinematic universe that everybody finds, like everybody agrees on, is going to be difficult, because there's so much disagreement already about what 40k is. And I think in order to make everyone happy, they're going to have to touch on all these different aspects of what 40k is. Maybe different shows, if it's a cinematic universe, with lots of different shows, maybe different shows can explore different elements of that. Like the MCU, the Loki film is tonally very different from the Loki show is tonally very different from WandaVision. And, WandaVision is tonally very different from Guardians of the Galaxy. So if they want to kind of address all these different aspects of 40k, I think they could do that by giving very different films or very different shows different themes and different tones. So they all mix together, but they still are, if done properly, they can still feel united under the one setting, like the MCU does. Something else that people are worried about is Amazon's attitude towards progressive social justice, what some people call wokeness. This is quite a hot issue right now, and some people feel very strongly about it. Some people think it's a good thing, some people think it's a bad thing, some people don't even notice that it's a thing. I'm just saying that it has a reputation among some people for doing this. So some people are worried that a very grim, dark, gritty setting like this is going to be ruined by producers at Amazon who are forcing in some kind of political agenda. It's not something I'm worried about really, but I did want to mention it. When Rings of Power was released, there were quite a lot of people who had hot takes on the racial diversity in there and the female characters, and there is maybe an argument to be made for Rings of Power that they could have handled that differently, or they could have handled that better. There are a few reasons that some people took issue with the casting choices made for Rings of Power. I think one of them is the fact that Tolkien's world is just quite explicitly based on English or Western European history and mythology. So it, for some people, is more obvious or more of a problem when a more diverse cast of actors are brought into that world. That's a whole other argument and one that we don't have time for today, but I think that it won't be a problem for the 40k universe. In fact, I think the opposite. I think for the 40k universe, actually, the more diverse the cast of characters, the better. I think the fact is that a lot of the things people take issue with when they are put into other franchises actually would not be noticeable if they were inserted into 40k, because they're kind of already there. If Amazon want to put in a really diverse cast in terms of ethnicity and race, that would fit. People wouldn't notice it because the 40k universe is already packed full of different ethnicities and races. If Amazon want to put in a bunch of female characters, I don't think 40k fans would notice that either. The 40k universe is already full of female characters. If Amazon wanted to do some message about wealth disparity or political oppression, that fits right into 40k too. So the point I'm making is that a lot of the things that people take issue with when they are put into other franchises fit in really well with 40k. This is a topic that I could talk about for much longer, and probably would be better if I had scripted it. So I'll leave it there, but if people are interested in the sort of issues about diversity within 40k, I might do another scripted video where I've had a bit more time to collect my thoughts. The other thing there that we should be aware of, that's not really a challenge at this stage, but just kind of to temper expectation, is that we have very little information about this project and we are in the absolute earliest stage possible. And I don't want to be a pessimist, but there are lots of times where projects like this are announced and nothing comes from them, or something comes from them 10 or 20 years later. So it's not necessarily a challenge, but maybe just be aware that just because we had this announcement doesn't mean we're going to see anything anytime soon, or maybe there is a chance that we will never see anything from this, and they won't be able to get the writers they want or the actors they want, or there'll be disagreements, or the production company will drop out, or Henry Cavill might drop out if they try and do something he doesn't like. There's a whole bunch of ways this can go wrong, basically. I hope it doesn't. I don't think it will. It seems like the people involved are very passionate about it, but it's definitely something to be aware of. And then the last section of this video, I just want to briefly talk about what I think personally I would like to see. As a bit of a film buff myself and a filmmaker, and a big fan of 40k, I've thought about this many times over the years, like how I would make a Warhammer film, what I would do, and how I would kind of deal with it if I was in charge. I am sadly not in charge of this project, but I have great faith in the people that are involved with it. But personally, if I was in charge, I think what they should do, at least to begin with, is start with a very grounded kind of gritty war film that is accessible for wider audiences, but is also good fun for the 40k fans. So the way I do that would be like your typical war film, something like Fury, with Brad Pitt in that tank crew that kind of go around, but just so it's a very grounded story driven by characters and their experience in the setting, but you just set it in 40k. So instead of a World War II tank, it's in a Lehman Russ, and these guys are, you follow them through their story, and through that story you learn about the Imperium, you learn about some of the adversaries of the Imperium, and you begin to learn about the universe. I don't think they need to come in hot with Space Marines. Maybe a Space Marine cameo at some point in the show, maybe the last episode, or maybe even like save it for season 2. I don't think they should come with Space Marines straight off the bat. I know they're popular, but they can mention Space Marines, and they can, talk about how great the Space Marines are, and wouldn't it be great if the Space Marines were here? Or they could be like Space Marine statues that they drive past and do some prayers at, to set the setting and really build up how amazing Space Marines are. And then when they eventually do come into the universe, the cinematic universe, maybe in the second season or maybe in their own separate show, the audience is holding them in the reverence that they should be held in, that we've been looking forward to it. It's been building up. The kind of like how Marvel built up to the Avengers films. You slowly ease in, and then when you get to that Avengers film, everyone is like so excited about it and so desperate to see it all happen. I think that's how Space Marines should be treated. We should tiptoe around them for a little bit until we get to it. And in the meantime, we should be looking at very grounded, very human stories, so Astra Militarum or Inquisitor kind of stuff, and then slowly embrace the weirdness as the cinematic universe grows and expands. Marvel's done this as well. Some of the more recent shows like Loki or like WandaVision absolutely would not have worked if they'd done them back in 2009 or 2010 when the MCU was quite young. And then as the universe has gone on and the MCU became more confident and became more popular and people started to understand it, they could introduce the weirder stuff. They could introduce Guardians of the Galaxy. They could do space stuff. But they couldn't just go straight in with all the bright, colourful costumes from the comics because people would find it difficult. And I think the same thing for this Warhammer cinematic universe is that to begin with, it should be very grounded, very relatable. If someone went into this show who's never known anything about Warhammer, they would still enjoy it because it'd be a really good film about soldiers, on the front line dealing with soldier problems. And through that, they would learn about 40k, they'd learn about the Imperium. And then as the cinematic universe develops, they get kind of drawn into it and they want to learn more about these aliens they've heard of. They want to know what the Space Marines look like and all this stuff. And I think that's how you draw it in. I also think it's really important that we have lots of different stories. I did mention this already, but like a real diverse range of stories from different factions, from different characters, from different time periods, from different places in the galaxy. I think that would really do justice to how wide and deep and interesting the 40k setting is. And something else I think we should probably be wary of is introducing popular main characters from the setting. If we start introducing like Robeut Guilliman or Eisenhorn and stuff, people are going to maybe take issue with how that character is portrayed or what actor is cast for it. But if we pick characters that are brand new and the writers create some really new, interesting characters that we've not met before, people will be excited to go on these journeys with these new characters, learn about these new characters, and there won't be so many issues with people imagining characters differently to how they are on screen. So I think, named characters could be mentioned or could cameo perhaps, and definitely they could be introduced later down the line. But I think the right way to do it at first is to create original characters, original stories that we're not too familiar with, so we can't put all this criticism on how our favourite story or our favourite character is being portrayed. That's basically all of my thoughts on this one. I could go into detail about all of these things, but this video is already getting quite long, so I think we'll call it there. And if there's any topics that I really want to go into more detail with, I maybe will create some more structured, organised, scripted videos about certain topics in the future, especially as more details come out about this project. Thanks for listening. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Anything I said that you really disagree with or you really agree with, let me know. I'm really interested to get everyone's thoughts on this. Thanks for watching, and I really hope to put more videos out on this channel this year, so stay tuned.